Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar on enrollment planning and forecasting the future with Plaid Forecast. I'm Andrew Drinkwater from Plaid Analytics. Thanks very much for joining us. It's been an interesting year for enrollment planners, and we're of the belief that enrollment planning is more important than ever before. So, by way of context, in early 2024, the Government of Canada cut international study permit processing by about 30% year over year. This will hit different jurisdictions in different ways. Some will have declines in certain sectors, some may see increases in certain sectors. This is a hypothetical example using Plaid University, suggesting that if we stopped growing at our original plan, the blue line, and instead made a lower revised plan, the orange line, that our budget would drop about $44 million over the course of 5 years. And that amount of a cut is something that prompts hard decisions in institutions. This is no longer cutting the office supply budget or reducing travel. This is necessarily impacting programs, faculty, staff, and students. So with that as context, let's get started. I'll note here that the story in Alberta in particular will be a little bit different. We've got a few notes throughout the presentation on Alberta because that province, perhaps more than any other, is slated to grow, both because of immigration within the country, as well as immigration from outside the country and favorable demographics within the province. So today, we're going to talk about why enrollment planning is done, who we are at Plaid, the changing enrollment landscape in Canada, how enrollment plans are created. We'll go through a demonstration of institutional scenario, and if time permits, we'll talk about a few provinces in terms of our international student projections as well. So Plaid Analytics empowers strategic enrollment management professionals to actively plan and better serve their diverse learners while meeting institutional goals. We offer services, solutions, and products related to data integration, data analytics, enrollment forecasting, which you'll see today, and data governance. I'm Andrew Drinkwater, I'm co-founder and president. Not on the line today, but often joining me for these, and our chief technical architect behind the solutions you're going to see today is Patrick Lougheed. We've worked with a variety of institutions from across North America. We're deeply grateful for their partnership. So one of the things to think about is whether you feel your enrollment or budget forecasts are collaborative, timely, accurate, detailed, and in particular, accessible to non-data, non-enrollment, and non-finance people. I'll skip the live poll today in the interests of time, but just something to keep in the back of your mind. So it's been quite a winter for enrollment planner, particularly if you're based in Canada. You may have seen some headlines around changes in international student admissions, and the ones that are shown here were sort of the doom and gloom variety. We've learned since that there is perhaps not quite as much doom and gloom as it seemed initially, that there's quite a few protections if you're a public institution in Canada. This said, there will be some difficult times ahead for institutions. So one of the things that we wanted to highlight, we mentioned that the story in Alberta would be different. And in this case, what we can see in terms of population projections from Statistics Canada is that Alberta will grow faster and sooner than the rest of the country. So what we can see here is about a 46% growth between 2021 and 2043 under the medium scenarios. A little bit lower in the low case and a little bit higher in the high case, but nonetheless, it's a substantial amount of growth in that time period. Conversely, the rest of Canada won't grow nearly as quick. In fact, to hit the same kind of growth rate, the rest of Canada is going to need an additional 25 years to achieve it relative to Alberta. So we see a much lower growth rate in the rest of Canada than we do in Alberta. Plaid Analytics has written some blog posts on this topic. If you want to get into a little bit more detail, there are some here. So when it comes to building an enrollment plan, they tend to start with things that are previously approved, such as a budget or a plan that was approved by a Senate or Faculty General Council or similar. Or they might start with actuals, as in what happened in, say, fall 2023. This may have been different than what the approved plan was. If it is, we should probably revise our plan going forward. The third category is what ifs. So this could take many different forms. It could take, what if we exceed our target? Or what if we fall short of our target? It could take a guess at, what does the federal government really mean by their cutbacks on international enrollments? It could be more advocacy driven. So it could be, if we got this additional kind of funding so we could add more seats in this program, what would that mean? So a contextual example of that is, if we could add 50 new family doctors in training or residents, what would that mean both for the institution offering the medical program and for the province at large who's supporting it? What if scenarios can help to paint a picture of, if we made an investment like this, here's what the outcome could be. And why you might want to do effective enrollment planning really comes down to effective resource allocation within your institution. So we've all seen those instances where classes are offered and you have a highly paid faculty member at the front of the room and they have 4 to 6 students. In most institutions, that is not a cost-effective way to deliver a course, though it may be a great experience for both students and faculty. There may be arguments to offer courses that have really small enrollments, but they should align with the institutional mission. And there should be other courses that help to effectively subsidize those. We want to make sure that the resources are allocated appropriately. If you're expecting growth in engineering, you might want to make sure that both engineering has resources to offer more courses, but also that science does for math courses. If you're community college, where entry-level English requirement or entry-level math requirements are required, if you're expecting growth in, say, business like human resources or marketing, you might want to make sure that in addition to human resources and marketing having capacity to accommodate more seats, that those English and math courses do as well. Otherwise, they become gatekeeper courses. Your students can't advance, even if there's space for them in their programs. Enrollment plans also matter for meeting targets, and there's a variety of different kinds of targets. They could be provincial or state level targets to say, we provide you with this amount of funding, and therefore you need to deliver at least this many seats in particular areas. They could be very targeted funding. So it could be, we will give you enough funding to run 22 seats in nursing. And you see this in particularly in health disciplines and certain technology disciplines that are highly targeted. Enrollment plans also matter for providing optimal service to your learners. So if you can better plan for where your students are going to be and when in their academic careers, you can ensure that there are things like enough academic advisors to meet with your students, or ensure that there's support for students for whom English is not their first language. So how does an enrollment plan come together? There's a lot of different ways this can happen. It depends on the kinds of institution that you work for. But here's an example. This is a process we see typically. So we'll start from the right and work our way left. So oftentimes an institution will have an enrollment plan. It might be 1 year, it might be 3 years, it might be 5 years. We don't see too many institutions with plans longer than that, but we know that planning happens for longer than that, just not necessarily the public-facing planning. At most institutions that we've seen, faculties or divisions or schools are involved in creating the enrollment plan. Their level of involvement does vary a little bit by institution. So they could be actively involved. Those are the ones we want to enable with a tool like what we're going to show today. They could be a little bit more passively involved. And the passive method often is the institutional plan goes through institutional research. They say, this is what faculty Y can get, this is what faculty Z can get. And there might be a little bit of negotiation around that, but for the most part, the plan is driven from the center and the faculties adopt it as appropriate. In the engaged model, the faculties are much more involved in defining what's possible for their faculty, and that rolls up to an institutional plan. You'll notice that the department level plans are in a more faded color of green here, and that's intentional. What we find is that only in some institutions are departments actively involved in this kind of planning. So here's a bit more concrete example from loosely based on a university that I once worked with, as well as a few others that we've seen in the space. So we've limited this just to 2 faculties to keep the diagram a little bit simple. In a real university, you have a lot more than that. But we can see that science and commerce faculties are involved. Their plans roll up to a Senate or faculty council, a committee on undergraduate studies, for example. And there'd be a similar one for graduate studies, just not shown on this diagram. If they have an enrollment management committee, it might be involved in reviewing those and coalescing all the plans across the different committees to make sure that everything is in alignment. And then there might be a final approval step, which is usually a Senate or faculty council or similar. The departments may be involved as well, so those are listed on the left. So if the departments are involved, or if their faculty is actively planning at the department level, even if the department's not actively involved, one situation we see happen a lot is, what if a particular program area over-enrolls? So in this example, we're saying, what if management information systems within commerce over-enrolls by 100 students? Well, oftentimes, students in MIS have to take calculus in their first year. So we need to make sure that science is both aware that there's an over-enrollment coming and that they have the resources to do something about it. And in an ideal world, they find out early. What often happens without good tools, though, is that MIS realizes fairly late in the game that they're going to be over-enrolled. So if you think of a fall intake term, it might be they realize in August that they're running over what they expected. And they forward that to an institutional research analyst, who then takes days or weeks to update the enrollment forecast for everybody, sends it out again. Science then finds out about it, and they're weeks before the start of class. So scramble ensues to be able to hire enough instructors, find rooms, or unfortunately, tell the students, you'll have to wait until next term. We just don't have the seats. What we'd like to see instead is that as soon as MIS can identify an over-enrollment, and this would be much earlier if your enrollment forecast updated automatically or on a set cadence, they can share that immediately with science. Science can actively adapt much earlier, or they can even suggest maybe you should pull back on the accelerator for your intakes. We can't accommodate that many more students. And then the forecast updated on a set cadence. Maybe it's weekly, which we tend to recommend, or maybe it's daily if it's important to be that frequent. So what did we build here? We built a tool called Plaid Forecast, and this was based on a vision. The idea was to get my associate vice president to be able to create scenarios, get results, and share them from her phone on the bus on the way to campus. We're proud to say that we've built exactly that. And what we're doing here in terms of enrollment, it can mean a few different things to a few different people. So just wanted to provide some context here. When we're talking about enrollment in this case, we're talking about supporting the goal of planning. So we're talking about an aggregate number of students. We are not talking about an early alert system for individual students, as an example. So at this point in time, Plaid Forecast projects headcount and full-time equivalent students in programs based on their progress, call that year level for sake of argument, or something similar to that, maybe block code if you're a trade school, as well as split by domestic and international and other categories that may be relevant to your institution. That helps us answer the question of how many students will attend in the future. We're also actively working on a course enrollments model. So once we know how many students there will be, the next step in the process is what courses are they likely to take. This will help better answer the questions that we see around interfaculty or intersubject area dependency. So if MIS over-enrolls, that will have a domino effect on mathematics, as an example. So we'll go through the live demonstration today. I've got just a couple of screenshots here and a process to share with you first. So this is the example of commerce over-enrolling. And what we're going to show today is starting at the top of our diagram here. So the idea is Central has created a plan A. They've worked on it for a while, and they share it with Commerce. And then working clockwise, Commerce can clone that scenario or make a duplicate of it, and they can name it something like Commerce Growth. And then they have a particular enrollment growth model. So in this case, 5% year over year change for domestic and 15% for international. Commerce can then share that back with Central should they choose, or with anybody else. And then either group can compare the differences across the scenarios. So that's what we're going to work through together today. And so I will go through this live in a minute, but I'll just briefly mention some of the outcomes that we're going to walk through. So the first part is about collaboration. So we have a list of scenarios, and then we can get into the individual runs of that scenario. So we can see here on the right-hand side that plan A has been run a number of times, a month ago, 2 hours ago, 56 minutes ago, etc. And we can see high-level results of that scenario, at least the most recent run of it, shown on the right-hand side. We can then get into cloning or duplicating our scenario. So this is how the Dean of Commerce can create their own version or variant of this scenario. We can see here that Dean has uploaded a spreadsheet that talks about what the intakes will be. And we can see here how we run the scenario. So they've clicked the green button at the top right, and then it prompts them to confirm that they want to run the scenario and how many iterations there are. Iterations are part of the simulation modeling techniques that we use. So Cole's notes is more simulations is better. Very few simulations is not such a good thing for statistical purposes. So we pick 1,000 as a general rule. There may be cases where you want to use a little bit different number than that. And then part 3 is running the model. So it took 12 seconds to generate the commerce scenario. It's a little bit different than what the central scenario was, remembering that it has growth. And here we see the results of that. So we can see that commerce is showing on the top there in orange for domestic, they're showing about a 300 increase relative to Central's more conservative plan, and similar story for the international lines that are down near the bottom. The yellow line is about 300 students higher than the red line. So now let's get into our live demo. I'm just going to switch which screen I'm sharing. Bear with me. Apologies for the delay. Every now and again, when you're trying to click in a live webinar, things just don't quite click the way that you want. So welcome. This is Plan Forecast. If you've never seen it before, you start with a dashboard, which gives you a timeline of things that have happened recently. So we can see that we've done some updates around the business growth scenario. And then on the right-hand side, we have a summary. These are effectively key performance indicators. So I have 9 scenarios in this system. Other users may have different numbers depending on who's shared what with whom. Of my 9, 8 have been completed, 1 had an error, and there's nothing running currently. So the magic of the whole thing is really around scenarios. We enable robust what-if planning. So we can see that we have a number of different scenarios here. I'm going to show you Central Plan A. So currently I'm wearing my Central Administrator hat. Pretend I work in institutional research in a university or college. We can see here that we've got 10 runs of this particular Central Plan A scenario. And more or less, our growth rate is pretty minimal over the years that we have here. Domestic does go up a little bit over time, but not substantially. Same kind of story for international in the red line. I'll briefly just show parameters so that we can see it. And remember that we're going to be working with the Dean of Commerce here. So I'll just briefly show the intakes that we were working with for them. In this particular fake institution, summer is our biggest admit term. So we can see here that domestic's admitting a little under 600 for sake of illustration. So my next step would be to share my scenario with the Dean of Commerce. So up at the top right, there's a share button. I can see here that I've already shared it with the Dean of Business. So I'm going to temporarily remove that so that you can see the process, and I'll hit save. And now I'll go back to share, and I'm going to re-add the Dean of Business so that we can see how that works. There's the option to make them a reader, as in they can view the results of the scenarios, but they can't do anything with them. There's the option to make them a writer, where they can take this scenario and they can update it as appropriate. That's what I'm going to pick for this user. I'm going to hit save. We can also make them the owner, but that may inadvertently remove some of my own permissions. So I'm going to avoid that particular step for today. So what I've done here is I've shared the Central Plan A scenario with the Dean of Commerce. I've now opened another browser tab. I can see here at the top, it's named Hello Dean, and that's short for Dean of Business in this case. And I can go to scenarios. I can see here that I can see the same Central Plan A that institutional research had shared with me. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to clone this scenario, and I'm going to call this commerce growth. And I'm going to make 5 years worth of forecast. I could choose another number if I so chose. And I'm going to hit create scenario. So now I could update my intakes using the interface if I so chose. And this might be realistic if I had a single program like the Bachelor of Commerce here. So I could make this something like 625 and 650, etc. I could do it that way. But what I'm going to show today instead is actually I'm going to import a file. And in this case, I'm going to drag my CSV file. Okay, so I've uploaded a CSV for Commerce now, and I can see that there's a number of new students here. I'm going to click use this file. It's going to double check that the fields it interpreted are correct. And this looks fine, so I'm going to hit next, and I'm going to hit import. And once that's done, we'll see that our Commerce number is updated for us here. So we used a spreadsheet to make our life a little bit easier for this one. But the web interface can be used for a wide variety of purposes as well. So now that those have updated, let's run the scenario and see how it worked out. So we're going to run 1,000 iterations of this as normal. And I'll go to the overview tab here. I can see right now that my scenario is queued. Nothing quite like a live demo. I think I waited just long enough that our auto shutoff kicked in for this environment. Okay, so I'll come back to that, but in the meantime, I'll show you the scenario comparison because I'm aware that we've only got a few minutes left. So as a general rule, scenario runs take about 12 seconds. But if it's the first run since the system turned on, it takes about 1.5 minutes for the system to come back online, which is what we're seeing here. So let's go compare a different scenario so we can see how this works. So we've got a business over enrolling, which is the same scenario effectively. And we'll click on more results. And what I wanted to show here was by program, and I wanted to look specifically at Commerce. Remember, that's the only program that we updated as the Dean of Commerce. So I'll remove airport operations and I'll add Bachelor of Commerce on here. And I will find international as well. And so now I've got my domestic and international for this particular scenario. I'm going to hit compare, and I'm going to compare it to Central Plan A. And momentarily, I will have a live comparison between my two scenarios where I'll be able to see the deltas between them. So in this case, our domestic by 2028 is about $22.95 in this program, versus in the more conservative central plan, it's down by about 300 relative to that. And international is almost 1,100 and 760. So it's a change of about 400. And so this give us a real-time way to be able to compare these scenarios. And we were able to do it in under 1 minute. So this is a lot of fun, and I could ramble on about that for a while. But suffice to say, this gives your senior leadership an interesting way to be able to see the differences between scenarios. I'll also note here that for the analysts in the crowd who want to dig into the data, it is possible to connect to all this data with existing tools, SQL clients, Tableau, Power BI, you name it, and you can swim through all of the great detail in much more than what you see on the screen here today. Okay, so with that said, let's just go take a quick look and see if our other scenario finished. It's now running, and looks like it was about 10 seconds ago, and now it's done. So that took kind of 12 seconds plus the 2 minutes it took for the machine to turn back on. Apologies for that. Okay, so let's move right along. I'll do a really quick fly through of some of the international study permit changes, but note that we have a webinar coming up next week on it in more detail. So lots of cautions around this. Government data is not particularly publicly available. We've made a lot of assumptions around retention rates and approval to registered rates, and that everybody who gets provincial allocations will actually be able to use their allocations, which we'll find out in future whether that's true. Note that what we show here will not add up to IRCC because we're doing this from an institutional perspective, not a regulatory perspective. This being said, what we did expect is that headcounts would go down across the country, primarily driven by the college sector. The reason the universities are a little more stable is because master's, PhD, and other forms of graduate education are exempt from the caps. Now, this being said, news emerging particularly out of Ontario this week suggests that colleges will be better protected than we originally thought. So this is probably pessimistic, but time will tell. Alberta hasn't released their allocations, so other than we know the public institutions will receive most of the students, we don't know too much beyond that. British Columbia looks like it'll be relatively stable, but with a little bit of a decline in the college sector. There's some interesting outliers though. Justice Institute, from a federal perspective, has almost no international students, but from a provincial perspective has almost 12,000. We posit that this is likely due to programs that are shorter than 6 months in duration that don't require visas. For those who don't know, Justice Institute is a specialized institution serving groups like police, firefighters, paramedics, etc. University of Canada West was a huge proportion of the visa approvals among the private institutions, and so they stand out in almost any analysis that you do. In Ontario, as mentioned, we expect the college sector to decline. This will be particularly pronounced if it's a public-private partnership, which are slated to close. So the interesting part for us there will be, how are they going to teach out the students that are in those institutions currently? Will some keep the public-private partnership to teach them out over the next couple of years? Or will they bring them to, quote unquote, the main institution? Will be interesting to see what happens there. What we know in Ontario is that most of the attestation letters have been allocated to public institutions, but it's not clear what a language school is. So some of that could change as that information becomes available. There are some interesting institutions as well. So for example, Windsor is 82% international at the graduate level. And this means such a change won't really impact them all that much. Lakehead is 53%, well, pretty high, but most of the others are kind of 20 to 30%. And so they'll notice this a lot more. So at Plaid, we're on a mission to make enrollment planning fast, accurate, and collaborative. We're seeking early stage partners who would like to help us continue to build out Plaid Forecast in an effective way so that it works really well for college, university, and polytechnic planning. We've got a number of institutions who are on the platform now, and we're excited to partner with the next group. In closing, Plaid Forecast is a mobile-friendly enrollment forecasting platform that will save you time, increase your accuracy, engage your stakeholders in the strategic enrollment management and planning process. We offer data integration, analytics, enrollment forecasting, and data governance solutions. As mentioned, our more detailed webinar on international student population changes in Canada will be coming up on May 21st. You can see the QR code there at this time, and it is open for registration on our website. So with that, I will say thank you so much for attending. If you're interested in a demo for your institution, please reach out to me directly. I'd be happy to set it up. I will say goodbye from Vancouver, and many, many thanks for joining us today.